Hey guys, welcome to the latest episode of the Goose of All Trades podcast. I'm your host, Gamer Goose. Today we look at two cases involving Australian citizens being killed abroad. In part one of this ongoing series, we will delve into the cases of Colin Ridgeway and Karina Ridgeway. Although both Australian with the last name Ridgway and being killed around the same time, neither case is connected in any way. Now the first case we are focusing on is the murder of Colin Ridgeway. Colin Ridgeway was born in Melbourne, Australia on the 19th of February 1937. He grew up being a very accomplished high jumper and also an Australian rules footballer. He played under 19s for Carlton and then went on to their reserves team in leaving the club in the mid-50s. Ridgway went on to compete in the high jump for Australia in 1956 Olympics without gaining a medal or podium finish. He also competed in the 1958 Commonwealth Games for Australia, and he also competed in the Australian Open Track and Field Championships in the mid-50s to the early 60s. Ridgway failed to make the 1960 Australian Olympic team, and he accepted a track and field scholarship to Lamar Tech. In 1961, he became the first Commonwealth athlete to clear 7 foot in the high jump. Even though Colin had not ever played the game of American football, he was discovered by the Dallas Cowboys and signed as an undrafted free agent for their 1965 team. During the pre-season, Colin played a key role in the beating of the Green Bay Packers. He started the year on the taxi squad before being promoted to the regular roster on the 3rd of November. Colin's style of the drop kicks that were used in the Australian rules football game in the mid-50s did not translate well to the American football style. He did not tend to fit into the way that the Dallas Cowboys wanted to play, so on the 24th of August 1966 he was waived. He did accept to play for Savannah, Georgia in the North American Football League in order to gain more experience in the sport, in hopes to pursue it further. Now to the murder of Colin Ridgeway. In 1993, he was murdered in his apartment in University Park, Texas. He was shot multiple times laying on his stomach, and he was found by his wife Joan. This case is very, very interesting because Colin and his wife Joan did leave a party only 5-10 minutes apart, and Joan was the one to call the police. But in her phone call to the ambulance and police, she stated that Colin had suffered a heart attack, not knowing that he'd been shot. Now that has caused a lot of controversy over the years. How could you not know that someone's been shot? And other people back her up and say that she was frantic, she didn't have a good look, all she knew that he was unresponsive, face down on the ground.
People use words like highly combustible and mutually abusive to describe the marriage of former football star Colin Ridgeway and his wife Joan. And when Colin was shot 7 times in their Texas home, some people believe Joan was the one who pulled the trigger, even though cops don't consider her a suspect.
Now, as you can tell, from the media's perspective, Colin's wife Joan was not a suspect, which a lot of people years later and decades later have said has been a big misstep. In all cases, the partner of the victim is always looked at, even if they're dismissed after an hour or they're dismissed after a year. The partner is always looked at. Joan was not taken seriously as a suspect, and a lot of people have kind of blamed the police for not jumping on that as soon as they should have, because Joan now has become a prime suspect years later. But as a lot of people know, that a lot of crimes are solved either early in the piece or later on or not at all. There's a dead space in between where the crime is not solved, and it's been in that area for a long time now. And this case, I think, is still open, but there aren't a lot of developing parts to this case at all at this stage. Now on to the suspects, or should I say suspect. So like I said earlier, Joan was never seriously looked at as a suspect, but there was one suspect who was arrested in 1996, and his name was Kenneth Bicking Jr. Now, I am reading this from an article from the Jacksonville.com website, and this reads: there may be a good reason to believe that Kenneth Bicking Jr. indeed hired his then 32-year-old son to kill a former Dallas Cowboys punter in 1993, as authorities say he did. Looking back, his son's criminal history from the early part of that decade could certainly serve as his resume today. Now 50, Kenneth Alfred Bicking III has landed in a Jacksonville jail cell on a 1992 rape charge, though detectives from South Florida and Texas still want to tie him to their murder cases. One of those slayings goes back almost 30 years to Hallandale Beach in Broward County, where a police sergeant who added Bicking's DNA to a state database in 2007 triggered his arrest last month in the Atlantic Beach rape. Now, there's not a lot of information about Kenneth Bicking Jr. or why he would murder Colin Ridgeway, but a now popular theory that has gained a lot of traction from a lot of media personality and a lot of former police officials as well, is that Kenneth was hired by Joan to kill her husband Colin. Now there's a bit of, wouldn't say fact behind this, but it has been looked into and has been researched, and the cops are sitting on this for 10 years now since Bicking Jr. had been arrested. Now, the University Park Police had always maintained that Bicking was hired to kill Ridgway by his father and Ridgway's widow, Joan Jackson. They told the Dallas Morning News that Bicking had deposited $5,000 into a checking and savings account 4 days after the killing. They also said he bought a boat for $2,500 not more than 2 weeks later, and then paid closing costs on a home in another 2 months. The paper also reported that Jackson and Bicking's father jointly held a $100,000 bank account in 1995. Now that's very, very telling, and that's very, very suspicious. There's obviously a link that the police have not yet released. The link in being how Joan knew Bicking Jr., how they were acquainted. It's not like she would have put an ad in the paper for a hitman or anything, so there's clearly a connection that the police have not yet released for whatever reason. Maybe holding out to the court case, but yeah, so in closing to this case, it's a case that's got very little information, but also a lot of, a little bit of online presence as well. Like I said, I did a bit of research and did come across this case. As an Australian, I'd honestly never heard of this, and that's someone that is a true crime geek. So in saying that, it's it was really fun researching this, and hopefully we can get closure to this case very soon. If it's the Bicking Jr. or another person or Joan that is getting charged, hopefully Colin, may he rest in peace, and that his family can get some justice in this case. And in saying that, let's move on to the next case. Now, our next case is focusing on Karita Ridgway, an Australian national who was killed by Joji Obara, and also the British national Lucy Blackman, because they do tie in. But we'll focus on Joji Obara just for a short period. So Joji Obara, he's a Korean-Japanese serial rapist who may have raped anywhere from 150 to 400 women. He was tried for the rape-related deaths of Australian national Karina Ridgeway in 1992 and British national Lucy Blackman in 2000. Blackman's death, as well as Obara's trial, received high press coverage in Japan and internationally, especially in the British media. Joji Obara was born on 10th of August 1952 to poor Zainichi Korean parents in Osaka. During his youth, Obara's father worked his way from scrap collector to immensely wealthy owner of a string of properties and pachinko parlours. Obara was educated at private Tokyo schools and received daily tutoring in a variety of subjects. At age 15, he enrolled in a prestigious prep school affiliated with the Keio University, virtually guaranteeing his acceptance into the university. 2 years later, after his father's death in Hong Kong, Obara inherited property in Osaka and Tokyo. After travelling extensively and graduating from Keio University with degrees in politics and law, he became a naturalised Japanese citizen and legally changed his name. Obara invested heavily in real estate speculation, gaining assets estimated as much as $38 million. After losing his fortune and his firm in the 1990s recession, he He was pursued by creditors and reportedly used his business as a money laundering front for the Yakuza syndicate Sumiyoshi Kai. Now on to Joji Obara's first victim. Carita Simone Ridgway was born on March 3rd, 1970, was an Australian model from Claremont, Perth, Western Australia, who was working in Tokyo's Ginza area as a bar hostess to earn money for acting school. Common in East Asian nations, hostess in this sense describes a modern form of geisha entertainer, i.e. young women at bars who are paid to engage in conversation with men, light their cigarettes, sing karaoke and sometimes dance, with a strict policy against men touching the hostesses or making sexual propositions. Popular hostesses often receive drinks, presents and social invitations from their favourite customers. Ridgway, who was offered a lift by Obara, was drugged. This led to chloroform-related liver failure and brain death. Obara's culpability was exposed when, while using an alias, Nishita, he had taken an unconscious Ridgway to the hospital claiming shellfish-related food poisoning. Ridgway died after life support was stopped at her family's request. She was then cremated and repatriated to Australia. The cause of death was initially deemed hepatitis E, and there was no support for an investigation by the embassy or Japanese police as requested by the family. So this was a big mistake by the Japanese officials in the embassy and the police department. So from the get-go, this is very, very suspicious. A Japanese national taking a Australian national to the hospital and pretty much dropping her off. I've read elsewhere that he didn't stay with her, he didn't state to anyone his relationship to Carita in any way, he kind of dropped her off and then left. So this obviously was the start of the downfall for Obara. So the investigation after this in the Blackman case revealed that he had already raped over 100 women previously to this. He would obviously drug them using chloroform and other drugs. And a lot of them wouldn't come forward because they were scared, because he had a very high standing in Japan, in Osaka specifically. But also a lot of them didn't recall any of the events. So no one come forward until afterwards, but I don't know if this comes down to the hospital staff or the police staff. I just find it very strange that a woman unconscious was dropped off the hospital and the man that dropped her off was nowhere to be seen, didn't leave any details, or like I said, his relationship to the woman in question. Now leading into Lucy Blackman. Lucy Jane Blackman was born on September 1, 1978. She was an English woman from Sevenoaks, Kent, who worked as a hostess in Roppongi, Minato, Tokyo. Blackman had previously worked as a flight attendant for British Airways and went to Japan to see the world and earn money to repay her debts. At the time of her disappearance, she'd been working as a hostess at Casablanca, a nightclub in Roppongi, later called Greengrass. On July 1, she went on Dohan, which was a paid date, with a Casablanca customer. Other than a few calls to a friend during the date, no one heard from her again. Blackman's family, wanting to find her, flew to Tokyo and started a high-profile direct media campaign, including approaching British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook, who was visiting Tokyo at that time. Newspapers started publicising Blackman's disappearance on July 13, when UK Prime Minister Tony Blair mentioned the case during an official visit to Japan, where he met with Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihiro Mori. An information hotline was staffed by British expats, and anonymous businessmen funded a reward of $100,000. As a result of the publicity surrounding the case, 3 foreign women came forward to describe waking up sore and sick in Obara's bed, with no memory of the night before. Several of them, it turned out, had reported him to Roppongi police but had been ignored. It was also around this time the police made the connection between cases via the man known as Nishita and Obara. On February 9, 2001, Blackman's dismembered body was found, buried in a shallow grave under a bathtub in a seaside cave at Murara, Kanagawa, about 50 kilometres south of Tokyo, just a few hundred metres from Obara's apartment. The body had been cut into 10 pieces and put inside separate bags, her head shaved and encased in concrete. The body was too decomposed to show the cause of death. According to Obara's indictment, he made Blackman a drink containing a drug before raping her at a condominium in Zushi, then killed her. Obara had maintained his innocence, claiming the drugs were voluntary self-administered. So, as I was stating earlier, this was really the downfall for Obara. So, there was a 7 to 8 year gap between Carita and Lucy Blackman's deaths. But with Carita, it's shown that with Carita's death, he wasn't looking to kill her. He'd obviously either overdosed her with the chloroform, or she just had a reaction to it, and he dropped her off the hospital hoping that she'd obviously be recovered. Or there's the other take that he kind of knew that she was going to die, so he dropped her off the hospital to look good. But the latter doesn't really sound convincing to me. It's more so the first one. But with the Lucy Blackman case, either she died at the scene before he had time to take her to the hospital, or at that point he'd gotten cocky and didn't really care if he'd killed her. He thought that he could get away with it. If he could get away with 150 rapes, he could get away with the murder. So there's two things, both very convincing in either sense. The time that he put into dismembering poor Lucy Blackman and also hiding the body, which took nearly a year to find. He clearly had no remorse. It wasn't a panic kill. He obviously put himself first. If it was an accident, he would have come forward and said, "I'm sorry." But as we know about Joji Obara, he's a sick man. And I think he grew, in my opinion, with cockiness and arrogance that he didn't really care that he killed her, and he thought that he could cover up. So, I think that it was an accident that he'd killed her, but he didn't care that he did. There was no remorse in that whatsoever. And now we head into the trial. In October 2000, Obara was charged with drugging, raping and killing Blackman, as well as with raping 8 other women and the manslaughter of Karina Ridgeway. His trial began on July 4th, 2001, and on April 24th, 2007, he was jailed for life on multiple rape charges and manslaughter, but was acquitted of Blackman's rape and murder due to a lack of direct evidence. Evidence supporting his guilt of rape, including the approximately 400 videos he took, which showed him engaging in date rape activities, including one with Ridgway. For the charge of manslaughter, the prosecutor produced an autopsy report showing traces of chloroform in Ridgway's liver and the paper trail showing that the accused accompanied her to the hospital before she died. In Blackman's case, however, the prosecutor could not produce any forensic evidence linking the accused to her death. Even her cause of death could not be determined. Blackman's father, Tim Blackman, accepted $450,000 in mimican condolence money from a friend of Obara's, but other family members were opposed to accepting the money. A trust, using some of this money and promoting personal safety, was established in Blackman's name. The judge stated that in deciding on the sentence, he did not attach much importance to Obara's payment of consolation money to a number of his victims. Former prosecutor Takeshi Tushimoto, now professor of criminal procedure law at Hukosh University Law School, criticised the decision to acquit Obara for the murder of Blackman by pointing to the conviction of Masumi Hayashi due to circumstantial evidence. The public prosecutor, however, appealed the Blackman-related verdicts as crucial forensic evidence had not been heard at the original trial, and on March 25, 2008, an appeal trial commenced in the Tokyo High Court. Tokyo's High Court found Obara guilty on his counts of abduction, dismemberment and disposal of Blackman's body on December 16, 2008. In early December 2010, the Supreme Court of Japan rejected Obara's appeal and upheld his life sentence. The Japanese judicial system has received some criticism for its handling of the case. It is believed that the police did not take this missing person case seriously because Lucy was working illegally in a job from which women often flee without notice. As a result, the discovery of the body came too late to determine the cause of death. The verdict, by a panel of 3 judges, cited the lack of forensic evidence as a reason for acquittal. Some foreign media from common law countries also criticised the police for having leaked information in the case to the press. So, as you can tell from the dates, this was a very, very long and drawn out court case. So by the time the trial began in July 4, 2001, and by the time that Obara was jailed in April 2007, it was a 6-year wait that the family members of Blackman and Ridgway and of the other rape victims, they had to wait so long for justice. And Lucy Blackman's family didn't get justice, but in the end they did. Probably not the way they wanted and probably not as quick as what they wanted. But for Carita's family, they wouldn't have been happy with the verdict of manslaughter if it wasn't for his sentence of life. So the family of Ridgway, they did get justice for their daughter, and the family of Blackman did get their justice in the end as well, which is fantastic, and we all hope Obara rots in prison. There is no chance of him ever getting out on bail, which is fantastic. He's a sick human being, and it's great to have him off the streets. A lot of information I haven't been able to add into this because I didn't want this as a long episode, but one thing that Obara was known to do when he filmed himself raping these poor women, he would blindfold himself in front of the camera and do a smirk, half laugh, and then he would turn around and he would proceed to rape the woman with the blindfold on. Don't exactly know why he did that, and a lot of people don't really know why he did that. A lot of people just think that he was just having fun. He kind of did it as a game to himself. Was that the woman was out of it, they were chloroformed, had no recollection of what was going on, and he just made it a game. He wanted to prolong the experience, and yeah, very sick man, a very, very sick case, and my heart goes out to the family of all the victims of the rape and the victims of Karina Ridgeway and Lucy Blackman's family members. So in closing, thank you for listening to this. There will be a part 2 in the future. For the next episode of my podcast, I'll be doing another true crime episode, but it'll be something different. And please, as always, if you do like this video, hit that like button. If you like it even more, hit that follow, subscribe button as well. My Twitch information is in the link below. If there's a case you'd like me to focus on, or something completely out of this world you want me to focus on that's nothing to do with true crime, please comment down below. I have been Gamer Goose for the Goose of All Trades podcast, and I will catch you another time. Thank you.